The floorboards of 1247 Maple Street groaned under Sarah Chen's swollen feet as she stepped into what the entire town called the death trap. 8 months pregnant and desperate, she'd bought the crumbling Victorian for just $15,000, every penny she had left after her husband's betrayal cleaned out their accounts. The neighbors whispered cruel jokes about the crazy pregnant woman moving into a house that should have been condemned decades ago. But Sarah wasn't crazy. She was a former forensic accountant who'd spent years tracking hidden assets for divorce cases, and something about the property records didn't add up. The house had been sold and resold 17 times in 30 years, always for suspiciously low amounts. When the basement floor collapsed under her weight, revealing a steel door hidden beneath rotting wood, Sarah's trained eye immediately recognized what others had missed. Behind that door lay stacks of cash, gold bars, and bearer bonds totaling $234 million, the lost fortune of a disappeared mob accountant from the 1980s. But as Sarah counted the money, she heard footsteps upstairs. Someone else knew about the treasure, and they weren't planning to share. Would Sarah's discovery save her future or destroy it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The footsteps above weren't her imagination. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the cold concrete wall of the hidden chamber, her hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly. The beam from her flashlight danced across bundles of $100 bills, each stacked perfectly preserved in vacuum-sealed plastic. The musty air carried traces of old cologne and cigarette smoke, as if the previous owner had just stepped out for coffee. 3 months ago, she'd been living in a penthouse overlooking the harbor, planning nursery colors and debating baby names with Marcus. Now she crouched in a basement tomb, listening to someone prowl through the wreckage of her desperate bargain. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career hunting hidden money for scorned wives, only to become one herself. The footsteps stopped directly above her head. Dust particles drifted down through the gaps in the floorboards, illuminated by her trembling flashlight. Sarah bit her lip, tasting blood, and forced herself to think logically. The steel door had been concealed by decades of debris and rotting wood. Whoever was upstairs couldn't possibly know about this room unless they'd been watching, waiting. Her phone showed no signal in the underground chamber. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Patterson, 3 houses down, who'd made it clear she thought Sarah was either insane or criminal for buying the house. The rest of Maple Street treated her like a pariah, crossing to avoid her when she walked to the corner market for groceries. A new sound made her blood freeze, the distinctive creak of the basement stairs. Someone was coming down. Sarah quickly switched off her flashlight, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. Her breathing sounded impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Through the door, she could hear measured footsteps on the basement's concrete floor, followed by the scrape of wood being moved. They were examining the collapsed section where she'd fallen through. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her panic. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, trying to calm herself. She needed to think like the forensic accountant she used to be, not like a terrified pregnant woman trapped in a hole. The property records she'd studied obsessively told a story of deliberate obscurity, shell companies buying and selling to other shell companies, each transaction designed to muddy the ownership trail. The house had been owned by Vincent Torino in 1987, right before he vanished while under federal investigation for money laundering. The FBI had searched the property twice but found nothing. They hadn't known about the hidden chamber. A bright light suddenly flooded the basement above her. Heavy boots moved in a slow circle around the collapsed floor. Sarah held her breath, praying the baby would stay still. "I know you're down there," a man's voice called out, rough and patient. "The question is whether you're smart enough to make a deal." Sarah's mouth went dry. This wasn't a random break-in. Someone had been watching her, waiting for her to find what they couldn't locate themselves. "Mrs. Chen," the voice continued, pronouncing her name like he'd practiced it. former employee of Blackstone Investigations, specializing in asset recovery. Husband cleaned out your accounts and ran off with his secretary to Costa Rica 3 months ago. You bought this place because you spotted the same patterns in the property records that we did. The casual recitation of her personal tragedy made her skin crawl. Someone had been investigating her while she investigated the house. "Here's what's going to happen," the voice said, closer now. "You're going to tell me how to get down there, and we're going to split what you found, 50-50. Otherwise, things get unpleasant for both you and your baby." Sarah's hand tightened on her flashlight. The chamber's layout was burned into her memory from those precious few minutes of exploration. Multiple exits, she remembered. Old bootlegger tunnels from Prohibition. Vincent Torino had been smarter than the FBI realized. The real estate agent's hands trembled as she fumbled with the ancient lock, the brass key grinding against years of rust and neglect. Sarah adjusted her purse strap over her shoulder, feeling the weight of the cashier's check that had drained most of her savings account. $12,000 for a house that had sat empty for 15 years. Even her optimistic nature couldn't ignore how desperate that sounded. "I should warn you again," Linda Hartwell said, finally coaxing the door open with a screech of protesting hinges. "The previous owner left everything behind. The family never came to collect any of it after old Cornelius passed." Sarah stepped across the threshold and immediately understood why the Blackwood estate had languished on the market. The air hung thick with dust and decay, and something else, a cloying sweetness that made her stomach lurch. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if responding to the oppressive atmosphere. The front hallway stretched before them like a museum corridor, lined with oil paintings whose subjects seemed to watch their progress with dark, suspicious eyes. Cornelius Blackwood had clearly been a collector of something, though Sarah couldn't yet determine what. Antique furniture crowded every available space, creating narrow pathways between towering bookcases and ornate cabinets. "Cornelius was quite the recluse in his final years," Linda continued, her voice echoing strangely in the vaulted space. "Never married, no children. The city tried to contact distant relatives, but apparently the family wanted nothing to do with this place." Sarah ran her fingers along a mahogany side table, leaving tracks in the dust. Beneath the grime, she could see the quality of the craftsmanship. Her eye, trained from years of antiquing with her grandmother, recognized genuine pieces when she saw them. The table alone was probably worth more than she'd paid for the entire house. They moved through the parlor, where sheet-covered furniture created ghostly silhouettes in the dim light, filtering through heavy curtains. Sarah pulled back one corner of fabric to reveal a stunning Victorian settee, its burgundy velvet upholstery remarkably well preserved beneath its shroud. "Why didn't anyone appraise the contents?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. Linda shrugged. The city was more concerned with getting the property back on the tax rolls. They just wanted it sold, contents and all. Besides, who's going to buy a place with this kind of reputation? What reputation? The agent's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, there were rumors about old Cornelius. People said he was involved in some shady business dealings back in the day. Nothing proven, of course, but small towns have long memories." Sarah nodded absently, her attention caught by an elaborate writing desk positioned near the tall windows. Its surface was clear except for an ornate letter opener and what appeared to be a leather-bound ledger. She approached it carefully, her footsteps muffled by a Persian rug that probably cost more than most people's cars. The baby kicked sharply, making her gasp and pause mid-step. "Are you all right?" Linda asked, genuine concern replacing her earlier nervousness. "Fine, just active today." Sarah rubbed her belly soothingly. "The baby seems to have opinions about everything lately." As they climbed the curved staircase to the second floor, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Each room revealed more treasures: Chinese porcelain vases, oil paintings in gilded frames, furniture that belonged in museums rather than collecting dust in an abandoned house. Her pregnancy brain fog lifted completely as she began mentally cataloguing items, estimating values. The master bedroom contained the crown jewel, a massive four-poster bed with intricate carvings that looked medieval in origin. But it was the enormous armoire standing against the far wall that truly caught her attention. Unlike everything else, it appeared to be locked, with an old-fashioned skeleton key hanging from a chain around the handle. Odd that he'd lock one piece of furniture and leave everything else open, Sarah observed. Linda glanced at the armoire nervously. Maybe that's where he kept his personal papers, financial documents, that sort of thing. Something in the agent's tone suggested she knew more than she was saying, but Sarah didn't push. She had bigger concerns, like how she was going to manage renovating this place while 8 months pregnant, and what she was going to do with a house full of what appeared to be genuinely valuable antiques. As they completed the tour and stood once again in the front hallway, Sarah felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease. The house held secrets, that much was obvious. But whether they were the kind that would solve her financial problems or create new ones entirely remained to be seen. "I'll need the keys today," she said firmly, signing the final papers on the dusty hall table. Linda handed them over with obvious relief. "Good luck, Mrs. Chen. You're going to need it." As the agent's car disappeared down the overgrown driveway, Sarah stood alone in her new home, listening to the old house settle around her and wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. The floorboards groaned under Sarah's weight as she stepped into what had once been the Blackwood Mansion's grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the pale morning light filtering through grimy windows, and the air carried the musty scent of decades-old secrets. She placed one hand protectively over her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. "Easy there, little one," she whispered. "We're just taking a look around." The realtor had handed over the keys yesterday with barely concealed relief, as if he couldn't wait to wash his hands of the property. Sarah didn't blame him. Even in broad daylight, the house felt oppressive, weighted down by its dark history. But for $47,000, she could afford to be brave. Her footsteps echoed as she moved through the main hall, past faded oil paintings that watched her progress with hollow eyes. The locals called this place cursed, claimed that anyone who lived here met a violent end. The Blackwood family had built their fortune in coal mining during the early 1900s, but their wealth couldn't protect them from tragedy. 3 generations had died within these walls, suicides, accidents, and one particularly gruesome murder that still made headlines every Halloween. Sarah pushed those thoughts aside. She didn't believe in curses, only in opportunity. And this house, despite its reputation, sat on prime real estate just outside downtown Millbrook. Once renovated, it would be worth 10 times what she'd paid. The kitchen needed complete gutting, but the bones were solid. Hand-hewn beams supported the ceiling, and the original hardwood floors, though warped and stained, were salvageable. She ran her fingers along the dusty windowsill, already envisioning how natural light would transform the space. A sharp kick from the baby made her gasp and lean against the counter. The pregnancy had been harder than she'd expected. Constant fatigue, swollen ankles, and an aching back that made every movement a challenge. But she couldn't afford to slow down. The baby was due in 6 weeks, and she needed this house livable before then. As she explored the first floor, Sarah noticed details that hinted at the mansion's former grandeur. Intricate crown molding ran along every ceiling. A massive stone fireplace dominated the living room, its mantel carved with elaborate roses. Hidden beneath layers of grime and neglect was something beautiful. The staircase to the second floor looked treacherous, several balusters broken and missing. Sarah tested the first step carefully before beginning her ascent, gripping the banister with both hands. The wood felt solid despite its appearance. Upstairs, 5 bedrooms branched off from a central hallway. Sarah had already picked out the nursery, a corner room with windows facing east and south that would flood the space with morning light. She stood in the doorway now, one hand on her belly, trying to imagine a crib where a mouldering desk currently sat. The master bedroom overlooked the backyard, where an enormous oak tree cast shadows across an overgrown garden. Sarah made a mental note to hire someone to trim the branches away from the house. The last thing she needed was storm damage on top of everything else. It was in the third bedroom that she found something unexpected. While examining water damage on the far wall, her fingers caught on a section of baseboard that seemed loose. She knelt awkwardly, her pregnant belly making the position uncomfortable, and gave the board a gentle tug. It came away easily, revealing a gap behind it. Sarah's pulse quickened as she peered into the dark space. Her phone's flashlight illuminated what looked like a metal box, tarnished with age but still intact. The box was heavier than she'd expected, and getting back to her feet while holding it proved challenging. But curiosity drove her to the nearest window where natural light would help her examine her discovery. The metal was silver, maybe even sterling, with an ornate pattern etched around the edges. No lock, just a simple latch that opened with surprising ease. Inside, wrapped in what had once been white silk but was now yellowed with age, she found documents. Old papers, some handwritten, others typed on letterhead she didn't recognize. As Sarah carefully unfolded the first document, her breath caught. It was a deed, dated 1923, for a plot of land in downtown Millbrook. Property that she knew now housed the town's most expensive shopping district. The deed was made out to Edmund Blackwood, but there was something else, a note paper clipped to it in different handwriting. E. This is only the beginning. The other parcels are hidden as discussed. Trust no one with the locations until the time is right. H. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she rifled through the other papers. More deeds, all for properties around Millbrook, some of which she recognized as current commercial buildings worth millions. There were maps too, hand-drawn and marked with symbols she didn't understand. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, as if sensing her excitement. Sarah looked around the empty room, suddenly very aware of how alone she was in this isolated house. If these documents were authentic, she'd just stumbled onto something far more valuable than real estate. The floorboards groaned under Sarah's weight as she made her way through the house's cramped hallway, her flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. 3 days had passed since she'd signed the papers, and Marcus still wasn't speaking to her beyond necessary pleasantries. The silence at home had become suffocating, driving her back to the house despite her doctor's warnings about stress. She paused at the bottom of the narrow staircase, one hand pressed against her lower back. The baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing her anxiety. Dr. Rodriguez would have her head if she knew Sarah was here alone, navigating uneven floors and questionable structural integrity at 36 weeks pregnant. But something about this place called to her. Maybe it was the way afternoon light filtered through the grimy windows, revealing glimpses of ornate molding beneath layers of neglect. Or perhaps it was simple desperation, the need to prove that her impulsive purchase hadn't been the financial suicide Marcus believed it to be. The upstairs yielded little more than water damage and mouse droppings. 2 small bedrooms with sloped ceilings, a bathroom that would need complete gutting, and a larger room at the front that might have been a master bedroom decades ago. Sarah ran her hand along the windowsill, imagining how it could look with fresh paint and new fixtures. The view overlooked Elm Street's mature oak trees, their branches creating a natural canopy that would provide perfect shade for a nursery. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen, causing her to double over. She gripped the windowsill, breathing heavily until the sensation passed. Braxton Hicks contractions, she'd been having them for weeks. Still, being alone in an empty house suddenly felt less adventurous and more foolish. She was heading back toward the stairs when her foot caught on a loose floorboard. The aged wood tilted up under her weight, and as she knelt to examine it, her flashlight revealed something that made her heart race. Beneath the board was a small cavity, and nestled inside was a leather-bound journal wrapped in oiled cloth. Sarah's hands trembled as she unwrapped the package. The leather was surprisingly well preserved, though the pages were yellowed with age. The first entry was dated July 15, 1962, written in careful cursive. Another delivery today. JM says we're close to having enough, but I worry about the risks. The neighbors are starting to ask questions about the late-night visitors. She flipped through several pages, her pulse quickening with each entry. References to packages, transactions, and coded numbers filled the margins. But it was an entry from September 1962 that made her breath catch. Hidden the last of it tonight. JM thinks the feds are closing in. If something happens to us, at least Margaret will have something to start over with. The map is with Father O'Brien. He'll know what to do when she's old enough. Sarah sank onto the dusty floor, journal clutched against her chest. The implications were staggering. The house's previous owners, the Kowalskis, according to the deed, had apparently hidden something valuable here, something worth enough that they'd created contingency plans and involved the local parish priest. A car door slammed outside, and Sarah scrambled to her feet. Through the grimy window, she saw a black sedan parked across the street. Two men in dark suits stood on the sidewalk, one pointing directly at her house. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the body language of people conducting surveillance. She quickly rewrapped the journal and tucked it into her jacket, her mind racing. How long had they been watching the house? Did they know about her discovery, or was their presence coincidental? The rational part of her brain suggested they could be anyone, city inspectors, utility workers, even lost real estate agents. But every instinct screamed danger. Sarah made her way carefully down the stairs, avoiding the steps she'd learned creaked loudest. Through the front window's dirt-streaked glass, she could see the men were no longer by their car. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized she couldn't see them anywhere on the street. A soft footstep on the front porch made her freeze. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, hardly daring to breathe. The doorknob rattled, followed by the scratch of metal against metal. Someone was picking the lock. Her phone had no signal. The old house seemed to exist in a dead zone for cellular service. Sarah looked frantically around the empty room, searching for another exit. The back door was visible through the kitchen archway, but reaching it would mean crossing in front of the front window. The lock clicked, and the front door began to creak open. Sarah pressed deeper into the shadows, one hand protectively covering her belly while the other clutched the journal. Whatever the Kowalskis had hidden 60 years ago, someone else knew about it, and they were willing to break into private property to find it. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing its mother's terror. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed that her impulsive house purchase hadn't just put both their lives in danger. Sarah's contractions had stopped completely by morning, leaving her with nothing but residual soreness and a gnawing anxiety that felt worse than the physical pain. Dr. Martinez had been clear during her emergency visit the night before. Any more stress could trigger premature labor. At 34 weeks, every day the baby stayed put was crucial. But the manila envelope on her kitchen table seemed to pulse with its own dangerous energy. She'd found it wedged behind a loose board in what used to be the Blackwood Mansion's library, discovered only because she'd been measuring the room for potential nursery renovations. The envelope was thick, yellowed with age, and sealed with red wax that had somehow remained intact despite decades of neglect. Sarah turned it over in her hands for the dozenth time, noting the elegant script across the front, for Margaret Blackwood, to be opened only upon my death. The handwriting matched signatures she'd seen on old property deeds in the county records, unmistakably belonging to Harrison Blackwood himself. The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her mother's internal debate. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly, remembering Dr. Martinez's warning. She should probably take the envelope to the police, or at least to a lawyer. The responsible thing would be to let someone else handle whatever secrets it contained. Instead, she carefully broke the wax seal. The first document made her breath catch. It was a will, dated just 3 days before Harrison Blackwood's supposed suicide in 1987. But this wasn't the will that had gone through probate. She knew because she researched the property's legal history extensively before purchasing it. According to public records, Blackwood had died intestate, leaving his worthless, debt-ridden estate to be eventually sold for taxes. This will told a very different story. I, Harrison Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and holdings both foreign and domestic, to my beloved wife, Margaret Rose Blackwood. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. The document was notarized, witnessed, and completely legitimate. But Margaret had died 2 years before her husband, killed in what newspapers had called a tragic car accident on the winding road leading away from the mansion. Sarah had read about it during her research, noting how the grieving widower had become increasingly reclusive afterward. The second document explained everything and changed everything. It was a letter in Harrison's handwriting, addressed to Margaret, but clearly never sent. The words seemed to burn off the page as Sarah read them. "My darling Margaret, I know you're reading this because it means they finally got to me. The accident was no accident, as we both suspected. Victor Chen and his associates made it clear that my refusal to sell would result in consequences. I should have listened when you begged me to take their offer and leave town." Sarah's maiden name hit her like a physical blow. Victor Chen, her own grandfather. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the letter. Victor Chen had died when she was 12, a respected businessman who'd built a small empire of restaurants and real estate investments. She remembered him as a stern but loving grandfather who spoke broken English and always smelled like cigarettes and jasmine tea. The letter continued, "The mining rights beneath our property are worth 50 times what they're offering for the house itself. The geological survey I commissioned confirms substantial rare earth mineral deposits extending deep under our land and likely beneath much of the surrounding neighborhood. They want me to disappear so they can claim the land for a fraction of its true value. If you're reading this, it means I wasn't strong enough to protect us both." Sarah felt the baby's movements become more agitated, responding to her rapidly accelerating heartbeat. She forced herself to breathe slowly as she read the final paragraph. "I've hidden the original geological survey and the mineral rights documentation in the place where we shared our first kiss. You'll know where to look. Trust no one in this town, my love. The corruption runs deeper than we imagined." The third document was a copy of mineral rights ownership, legally transferring underground access to Margaret Blackwood in perpetuity. At the bottom, Harrison had written in different ink, as if added later, "Margaret, they're coming for me tonight. I can see the cars at the end of the drive. The original survey's behind our wedding photo. Take it and run. Don't trust Victor Chen or anyone associated with him. Our love was real. Everything else was a lie." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, making her jump. It was from Tom, her contractor, found something weird in the basement wall. "You need to see this. Coming over in an hour." She looked out her kitchen window toward the mansion, its dark windows seeming to watch her accusingly. Somewhere in that house was evidence that could prove her grandfather had been involved in murder, evidence that could destroy her family's reputation and possibly implicate people still alive, still powerful. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah felt a familiar tightness across her abdomen. Not now, she thought desperately. She needed answers before she could figure out what to do with this devastating knowledge. The basement stairs groaned under Sarah's weight as she descended into the musty darkness, her phone's flashlight cutting through shadows that seemed to move with her breath. The wooden steps sagged more with each footfall, and she gripped the rickety handrail with white knuckles, acutely aware of the precious cargo she carried. The air grew thicker as she reached the bottom, heavy with decades of neglect and something else, something that made her nose wrinkle, mold maybe, or worse. She swept the phone's beam across the basement, revealing a cramped space filled with forgotten debris. Cardboard boxes dissolved into soggy pulp, their contents spilled across the concrete floor like archaeological layers of the Hendricks family's past. Sarah picked her way carefully through the maze of refuse, her contractor's eye automatically cataloguing what needed to be done. New stairs, certainly, waterproofing. The foundation looked solid enough, though water stains on the walls told stories of decades of flooding. She was about to turn back when her light caught something that made her pause. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit, was a door. Not just any door. This one was steel, painted industrial grey, with hinges that looked far newer than anything else in the basement. Sarah frowned, consulting the house's floor plans on her phone. According to the blueprints, there should be nothing but foundation wall in that corner. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as she approached, as if sensing her elevated heart rate. "Easy, little one," she whispered, one hand on her belly as she examined the mysterious door. There was no handle on her side, just smooth metal and what looked like a keypad mounted beside the frame. The LED display was dark, but when Sarah's finger accidentally brushed against it, the screen flickered to life with an electronic beep that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. 4 zeros blinked expectantly at her. Sarah's mouth went dry. This wasn't some old root cellar or storage room. This was recent, sophisticated, and very deliberately hidden. She thought of Marcus Chen's words about the Hendricks family, about Harold's drinking and financial troubles, about the way neighbors whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. Her finger hovered over the keypad. What were the odds the code was still the default? Or something simple, something Harold Hendricks might have chosen in a moment of paranoia or desperation. She tried 1234. The display flashed red and beeped angrily, then 00000. Another angry beep. Sarah chewed her lip, thinking, what would a man like Harold use? Something meaningful but not too clever. She tried his birth year, 1952, according to the property records. Nothing. The baby shifted restlessly, and Sarah realized she'd been standing in the damp basement for nearly 20 minutes. Her back ached, and the musty air was making her lightheaded. She should go upstairs, call Marcus, maybe even the police. This was clearly something beyond normal renovation discoveries. But something made her try one more combination. On impulse, she entered the address of the house, 1847. The display flashed green, and Sarah heard the distinct click of locks disengaging. Her heart hammered as she pushed the heavy door open. Cool air rushed out, carrying with it a smell that was completely different from the basement's mustiness. Clean, almost sterile, like a bank vault. The space beyond was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, but the contrast with the decrepit house above was startling. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and the floor was polished concrete, but it was what sat on those shelves that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Boxes, dozens of them, all identical, all bearing the logo of First National Bank. Safety deposit box contents, she realized, though how Harold Hendricks had gotten them was a question that sent ice water through her veins. Sarah approached the nearest shelf with trembling hands. The first box she opened contained documents, bearer bonds, stock certificates, insurance policies with names she didn't recognize. The second held jewelry, pieces that even her untrained eye could tell were valuable. Real pearls, gold that gleamed even in her phone's harsh light, diamonds that caught and scattered the beam into rainbow fragments. The third box made her sink heavily onto a small stool, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Cash. Stacks of it, bundled and organized with the precision of someone who'd had plenty of time to count and recount their treasure. Hundreds mostly, but she could see 50s and 20s mixed in. More money than she'd ever seen in one place, more than she'd made in her best year as a contractor, and this was just one box among dozens. Sarah's hands shook as she closed the lid, her mind reeling. Harold Hendricks hadn't been just a drunk with money troubles. He'd been something else entirely, something that explained why he'd lived like a pauper while sitting on a fortune, why he'd died alone and unmourned, why the house had sat empty for so long that the town had been willing to sell it for almost nothing. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah realized she was no longer alone with her discovery. Someone was moving around upstairs. The basement smelled of decades-old mildew and something else, something metallic that made Sarah's stomach clench. She descended the creaking wooden steps carefully, one hand gripping the banister while the other supported her growing belly. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing water-stained concrete walls and a floor littered with debris. She'd been putting off exploring the basement for weeks, But the discovery of the hidden room upstairs had changed everything. If there were secrets in the walls above, what might be buried below? The beam swept across rusted tools hanging from pegboard, mouldy cardboard boxes, and what appeared to be an old coal furnace converted to gas sometime in the 1970s. Nothing seemed particularly unusual until the light caught something glinting behind the furnace. Sarah maneuvered around the bulky unit, her movements awkward in the confined space. Behind it, partially hidden by shadow, was a steel door set flush into the concrete wall. No handle, just a smooth surface with what looked like a combination lock mechanism. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Another hidden room. The baby kicked sharply as if sensing her excitement, and Sarah pressed her palm against the spot. "Easy there, little one. Mummy's just doing a little detective work." She examined the lock more closely. Unlike the simple latch upstairs, this was serious security, the kind used on bank vaults or safety deposit boxes. The combination dial was worn smooth from use, and scratches around the edges suggested it had been opened many times over the years. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps on the front porch, then the distinctive creak of someone testing the front door. Sarah switched off the flashlight and listened, her breath coming in short gasps. The footsteps moved around the house's perimeter. Someone was circling the property, checking windows, looking for a way in. Her cell phone had no signal in the basement, and the landline was upstairs in the kitchen. The footsteps stopped directly above her, near what she knew was the kitchen window. Then silence. Sarah waited, counting her heartbeats in the darkness. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, she heard a car engine start up somewhere down the street and fade into the distance. She switched the flashlight back on, hands trembling slightly. The smart thing would be to go upstairs, call the police, report a prowler. But something about the timing felt wrong. She'd found 2 hidden spaces in 2 days, and suddenly someone was very interested in her property. Instead of leaving, she turned back to the combination lock. If someone was watching the house, waiting for her to find whatever was hidden here, then maybe she needed to find it first. The dial turned smoothly under her fingers. She tried obvious combinations: 1234, 00000, 1111, nothing. Then she remembered the date carved into the wooden beam upstairs, 1978. She tried different variations: 1978, 7819, 1897. Still nothing. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah winced. The stress wasn't good for either of them. She was about to give up when she noticed something scratched into the concrete beside the door, barely visible marks that looked deliberate. She angled the flashlight closer. Numbers, etched so lightly they were almost invisible. 071,542. Her fingers moved to the dial. July 15th, 2042. The lock clicked open on the final number. The steel door swung inward on well-oiled hinges, revealing a space roughly the size of a closet. But this wasn't storage. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and every shelf was filled with objects that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Jewelry boxes, dozens of them, in various sizes and materials. Some looked antique, others more modern. All appeared valuable. Her flashlight beam moved methodically across each shelf, cataloguing what she saw. A carved ivory box with gold hinges, several leather jewelry cases with monogrammed initials, a small oriental lacquer chest, multiple velvet ring boxes. She reached for the nearest box, a burgundy leather case with someone's initials embossed in fading gold. Inside, nestled in faded silk lining, was a diamond engagement ring and matching wedding band. Both looked expensive, the kind passed down through generations. Sarah's hands shook as she opened another box, then another. Each contained jewelry, rings, necklaces, bracelets, watches, all of it clearly valuable, all of it carefully preserved. The collection represented decades of acquisition. But these weren't random purchases. Every piece had the intimate quality of personal jewelry, the kind women received as gifts or inherited from their mothers, the kind they would never willingly part with. A horrible realization began to take shape in Sarah's mind. The dates upstairs, the careful preservation, the secretive storage. The metallic smell she'd noticed when she first came downstairs wasn't just old pipes or rusty tools. She was looking at trophies, and somewhere in this house lived someone who had been collecting them for a very long time. The baby kicked urgently now, as if trying to warn her. Sarah's survival instincts finally overrode her curiosity. She needed to get out of this house. Now. But as she turned toward the stairs, she heard the front door open above her. Someone was inside. The basement felt different this time. Sarah descended the creaking stairs with her phone's flashlight casting dancing shadows on the walls, but something had shifted in the 3 days since her last visit. The air seemed thicker, charged with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. She paused halfway down, one hand gripping the railing, the other protectively cradling her belly. "Just your imagination," she whispered, but her voice sounded hollow in the confined space. The wooden box sat exactly where she'd left it, nestled behind the old furnace. But as she knelt beside it, awkwardly, given her expanding waistline, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh fingerprints in the dust around the box's edges. Not hers. Someone had been here. Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted the lid, half expecting to find the compartment empty. But the documents were still there, along with something new. A yellowed envelope marked for whoever finds this in the same spidery handwriting as the ledgers. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Stop digging or face the consequences." The basement suddenly felt like a tomb. Sarah grabbed the envelope and climbed the stairs as quickly as her condition allowed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Upstairs, she locked the door and checked every window before settling into the kitchen chair to examine her discovery. The envelope contained a single photograph and a letter dated 15 years ago. The photo showed a young woman with dark hair standing beside the very house Sarah now owned. Even in the faded image, the family resemblance was unmistakable. This had to be Eleanor Hartwell's daughter, the one who'd supposedly died in an accident. But according to the letter, Margaret Hartwell hadn't died at all. "To whoever finds this record," the letter began, "know that my daughter Margaret discovered something that certain people in this town would kill to keep hidden. They made her disappear, staged her death, and threatened me with the same fate if I ever spoke the truth. The fortune hidden in this house is blood money, payment for silence about crimes that go back generations. The town's founding families built their wealth on lies, and they've been covering it up ever since. Margaret has the proof they need, had it anyway, before they made her run. If you're reading this, then I'm probably dead, and you're in more danger than you know." Sarah's hands shook as she set the letter down. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. She needed to think, needed to process what she'd learned, but her mind kept circling back to that threatening text message. How had someone gotten her number? How long had they been watching? The doorbell rang. Sarah froze, the letter still clutched in her hands. Through the front window she could see a police cruiser in her driveway. For a moment, relief flooded through her, until she remembered that in a town where founding families had been covering up crimes for generations, she couldn't trust anyone in a position of authority. The bell rang again, followed by heavy knocking. "Mrs. Chen, this is Officer Davidson. We need to speak with you about a break-in reported in your neighborhood." Sarah carefully folded the letter and slipped it into her jacket pocket along with the photograph. She took a steadying breath and opened the door, keeping the chain latched. Officer Davidson was a large man with kind eyes and a salt-and-pepper mustache. He looked harmless enough, but Sarah had learned not to trust appearances. "Is everything all right, Mom? You look pale." "I'm fine. What's this about a break-in?" "Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, reported seeing someone prowling around your property last night. Figured we should check in, make sure you're okay." "Mind if I come in?" Sarah hesitated. "Actually, I was just heading out. Doctor's appointment." "Of course. How far along are you?" 7 months. The lie came easily. She was closer to 8, but something told her to keep that information to herself. Exciting time. My wife and I have 3 kids. Say you haven't noticed anything unusual lately, have you? Strange cars, people hanging around? Sarah thought about the fingerprints on the box, the threatening text, the letter burning like a secret in her pocket. No, nothing. Officer Davidson nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. Well, if you do notice anything, don't hesitate to call. We want to keep you and that baby safe. After he left, Sarah watched from her window as his cruiser disappeared around the corner. Then she grabbed her keys and headed for her car. She needed to get out of the house, needed time to think. But as she backed out of the driveway, she noticed another car starting its engine 2 houses down. Someone was following her. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed the accelerator. Eleanor Hartwell's daughter had run 15 years ago and stayed hidden ever since. Now Sarah understood why. The question was whether she'd figured it out in time to save herself and her unborn child. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the photographs scattered across her kitchen table. The morning light streaming through the window made the images even more disturbing. Dozens of pictures of her house taken from different angles, some clearly shot from the woods behind her property, others from the street at various times of day and night. She'd found them slipped under her front door in a manila envelope with no return address. No note, no explanation. Just the unmistakable message that someone had been watching her every move. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Found something. Meet me at the diner in an hour. Come alone. Sarah's baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her anxiety. She gathered the photographs and stuffed them back into the envelope, her mind racing. The smart thing would be to call Detective Rivera, show him the pictures, let the police handle it. But Marcus had specifically said to come alone, and something in his urgency suggested this couldn't wait for official channels. The Millbrook Diner sat on the edge of town, a relic from the 1950s with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. Sarah found Marcus in the back corner, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "You look terrible," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thanks. You don't look so great yourself." His eyes darted to the envelope she'd placed on the table. "What's that?" Sarah pulled out one of the photographs, a clear shot of her bedroom window at night, the curtains drawn but a warm glow visible from within. "Someone's been watching me." Marcus went pale. "Jesus, Sarah, this is getting out of hand. What did you find?" He glanced around the nearly empty diner, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I've been digging into the Whitmore property records, going back decades. There are some serious discrepancies in the ownership transfers." "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind that suggest someone's been laundering money through real estate transactions for years, maybe decades." Marcus pulled out his laptop and opened a spreadsheet. "Look at this pattern. The house changes hands every few years, always for amounts that don't match the actual market value. Sometimes way too high, sometimes way too low." Sarah studied the numbers, her accounting background helping her spot the anomalies immediately. These transactions don't make sense. Who sells a property for $200,000 one year, then buys it back for $50,000 the next? Someone who needs to move dirty money around without attracting attention. And look at this. Marcus pointed to a series of entries from the 1980s. 3 of the buyers during this period were later investigated for drug trafficking. One of them is currently serving time for money laundering. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "So you think the house has been used as part of some kind of criminal enterprise?" "I think your house has been the centerpiece of a money laundering operation for 30 years, and when old Mrs. Whitmore died and the property went into probate, it disrupted their system, but I bought it legitimately, through the estate sale, which means whoever was running this operation lost their primary asset, and now they want it back." Marcus's expression was grim. "The question is, what are they willing to do to get it?" Sarah thought about the photographs, about the figure she'd seen watching her from the trees, about the strange phone calls that had started 2 days ago, heavy breathing, then silence. They're trying to scare me into selling. Are they succeeding? Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Mrs. Chen? The voice was distorted, clearly run through some kind of electronic filter. I trust you received our gift this morning. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Who is this? Someone who's very interested in your property. You're sitting in a dangerous place, Mrs. Chen, both literally and figuratively. Sarah's eyes swept the diner. The voice was right. They were being watched. What do you want? I want you to accept the generous offer you're going to receive tomorrow. Sell the house, take the money, and move somewhere far away. Somewhere safe for you and your baby. The line went dead. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. What did they say? Marcus demanded. They're watching us. Right now. Sarah struggled to control her breathing as panic threatened to overwhelm her. They know about the baby. Marcus was already gathering his laptop. We need to get out of here. Now! As they stood to leave, Sarah caught a glimpse of a man in a dark jacket at the counter. His face turned away, but his posture suggesting he was listening to every word. When she looked back a second later, he was gone. Walking to her car, Sarah felt exposed and vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every parked car a potential danger. The photographs in her envelope felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She was no longer just fighting for a house. She was fighting for her life. The basement stairs creaked under Sarah's weight as she descended into the musty darkness, her phone's flashlight cutting through shadows that seemed to dance away from the beam. The wooden steps felt solid enough, though years of neglect had left them worn smooth in the centers where countless feet had tread. At the bottom, she swept the light across the space, revealing a typical old house basement. Stone foundation walls, exposed wooden joists overhead, and decades of accumulated debris. Cardboard boxes sat stacked against one wall, their corners soft with moisture damage. An ancient furnace hulked in the corner like a sleeping giant, its metal surface painted over so many times the original color was anyone's guess. But it was the floor that caught her attention. Most of the basement had a concrete slab, cracked and stained with age. However, near the far wall, a section remained dirt, hard-packed earth that looked deliberately preserved. Sarah made her way over, stepping carefully around paint cans and forgotten furniture. The dirt section was roughly rectangular, perhaps 8 feet by 6 feet, too regular to be accidental, too purposeful to be oversight. She knelt awkwardly, her belly making the movement clumsy, and brushed away loose debris with her free hand. Her fingers found something unexpected, a thin metal edge protruding just barely above the packed earth. Sarah's pulse quickened as she traced the outline with her fingertips. It felt like the rim of a container, deliberately buried just beneath the surface. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her excitement. I know, little one, she whispered. Mama found something interesting. She needed tools, real tools, not just her bare hands. But first she wanted to understand the scope of what lay hidden here. Sarah used her phone to photograph the area from multiple angles, documenting the metal edge and its position relative to the basement's layout. As she stood to leave, her light caught something else, scratches on the stone wall above the buried container, carved letters crude but deliberate, JM 1987 Insurance. Jonathan Morse, the previous owner's father, she recalled from the property records. But insurance for what? Sarah climbed back upstairs, her mind racing. She needed to be smart about this, careful. If her suspicions were correct, if this house really did hide something valuable enough to warrant threatening an expectant mother, then she couldn't afford to be reckless. In her car, she drove to the hardware store on Main Street. The elderly clerk, wearing a vest that had seen better decades, looked up from his newspaper as she entered. Help you find something? I need a small shovel, something for delicate work. And maybe a brush set, the kind archaeologists use? His eyebrows rose. Planning some excavation? You could say that. Just cleaning up an old property I bought. He led her to the tools section. "You're the one who bought the Morse place, aren't you? Heard tell around town." Sarah selected a small spade and a set of brushes. News travels fast. Always does, especially when it's about that house. He rang up her purchases, his movements deliberate. "Found anything interesting over there?" The question carried more weight than casual curiosity. Sarah studied his weathered face, noting how his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Just the usual old house problems, leaky pipes, creaky floors. He handed her the receipt. "Well, you be careful over there. Old houses can be dangerous, especially for someone in your condition." The words sent a chill down her spine. Was that friendly concern or something darker? "I'll be careful." Back at the house, Sarah parked in the rear yard, out of sight from the street. She didn't want neighbors observing her activities. The threatening note had made it clear that someone was watching and she needed time to work without interference. The basement felt different now, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Sarah positioned her phone to provide steady light and began the delicate process of excavation. The dirt came away easily, as if it had been recently disturbed. Within minutes, she had exposed the top of a metal container, a strongbox, roughly the size of a briefcase. Her heart hammered as she worked to clear around its edges. The baby moved restlessly, responding to her elevated stress. Sarah paused, taking deep breaths to calm herself. Whatever was in this box, whatever Jonathan Morse had buried here in 1987, she was about to discover. The lock had long since corroded, and the metal lid lifted with surprising ease. Sarah angled her phone's light into the interior and gasped. Stacks of currency filled the space, wrapped in plastic and remarkably well preserved. But it wasn't just money. There were documents too, photographs and what looked like record books. Her hands trembled as she lifted out the first bundle. The bills were old but real. Hundreds and fifties, more cash than she'd ever seen in one place. But as she examined the photographs beneath, her blood ran cold. They showed faces she recognized from old newspaper clippings, missing persons cases from the 1980s, and in several photos, standing beside these people, was a younger Jonathan Morse. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the faded photograph, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. The image showed a much younger Vincent Hartwell standing beside a gleaming car, his arm around a woman who looked remarkably like the portrait she'd found upstairs. But it was the background that made her blood run cold. The distinctive iron gates and overgrown garden were unmistakably those of her property, decades earlier when it had been properly maintained. The basement felt smaller now, more oppressive, as if the walls were closing in around her. She carefully placed the photograph back in the box and continued searching, her movements growing more frantic with each passing minute. Birth certificates, property deeds, insurance papers, all bearing the Hartwell name, all confirming what she was beginning to suspect. This house had belonged to Vincent Hartwell's family long before it became the town's notorious eyesore. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, meeting running late. "Home by 8. Love you." Sarah glanced at the time, 6:30 p.m. She had at least an hour before he'd start worrying about her absence. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her anxiety, and she pressed a protective hand to her belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, though her voice sounded hollow in the dusty air. "We're just learning some history." But even as she said it, she knew this was far more than a history lesson. The pieces were falling into place with disturbing clarity. Vincent's aggressive interest in purchasing the property, his knowledge of the house's layout, his insistence that she was in over her head, it all made sense now. Sarah pulled out another document, this one bearing an official seal. It was a police report dated 37 years ago, detailing the investigation into the disappearance of Eleanor Hartwell, aged 28, last seen at the family residence on Maple Street, the same address where Sarah now stood. A breath caught in her throat. Eleanor, the woman from the portrait upstairs. Vincent's wife? Sister? The report was frustratingly vague, noting only that Mrs. Hartwell had vanished without a trace, leaving behind no indication of where she might have gone or why. The basement seemed to grow colder as Sarah continued reading. The investigation had been brief, perfunctory. Eleanor Hartwell had a history of mental instability, according to the report. Family members suggested she might have wandered off during one of her episodes. The case was closed within 6 months, filed away as a missing person presumed dead. But Sarah's discovery of the hidden room and its contents suggested a very different story. She was so absorbed in the documents that she almost missed the sound of footsteps overhead. Sarah froze, listening intently. The house settled and creaked constantly, but these were deliberate, measured steps moving across the main floor. Marcus wasn't due home for another hour. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she quietly gathered the most important documents and slipped them into her jacket pocket. She turned off the flashlight and moved carefully toward the basement stairs, using the faint light from upstairs to guide her way. The footsteps had stopped. She climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step to avoid the creaks she'd memorized over the past weeks. At the top, she pressed her ear to the door and listened. Silence stretched for long moments, broken only by the sound of her own rapid breathing. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the stress of her discoveries was making her paranoid. Sarah eased the door open and peered into the hallway. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Everything appeared normal, undisturbed. She stepped into the hallway and immediately noticed the front door standing slightly ajar. She was certain she'd closed it when she arrived. The afternoon breeze stirred the dust motes in the air, and somewhere in the house, a door creaked on its hinges. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty rooms. "Is someone there?" No response. Sarah moved toward the front door, her pregnancy making her movements awkward and slow. As she reached for the handle to close it properly, she noticed fresh footprints in the dust on the porch. Footprints that definitely weren't hers. Someone had been here, someone might still be here. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, and Sarah felt a sharp pain shoot across her lower back. She needed to leave. Needed to get somewhere safe where she could process what she'd learned, but as she turned to gather her things, she froze. Vincent Hartwell stood in the doorway of what had once been the living room, his familiar smile nowhere to be seen. His eyes were cold, calculating, and fixed directly on the documents visible in her jacket pocket. "I'm disappointed, Sarah," he said quietly. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this." The basement felt different now. Charged with an energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. The false wall she'd discovered behind the furnace had revealed a narrow chamber, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. Her flashlight beam danced across water-stained concrete walls as she squeezed through the opening, her pregnant belly making the passage uncomfortably tight. The hidden room beyond defied explanation. Unlike the rest of the basement's rough construction, this space had been finished with deliberate care. Floor-to-ceiling shelving lined 3 walls, each shelf meticulously labeled with dates spanning from 1952 to 1987. Sarah's breath caught as she realized what she was looking at. Not the treasure she'd been seeking, but something far more sinister. Hundreds of photographs stared back at her from neat manila folders. Black and white images of the town's residents going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched. Children playing in yards, couples arguing through kitchen windows, families gathered around dinner tables. Each photo bore a timestamp and location in spidery handwriting she now recognized as belonging to Harold Whitmore's father, Edgar. Her hands trembled as she pulled out folder after folder. The surveillance wasn't random. It followed patterns, targeting specific families over months or years. The Hendersons who'd lived on Maple Street, the Kowalski family from the old Polish neighborhood, the Chengs who'd run the corner market before her grandfather's time, all families who'd left town suddenly, their departures now taking on a more ominous meaning. But it was the bottom shelf that made her blood run cold. A locked metal box sat among the files, its key hanging from a nail driven into the wall above. Inside, she found not photographs but documents, property deeds, bank statements, insurance policies, all bearing forged signatures, all transferring ownership of various properties to Edgar Whitmore for impossibly low sums. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. Edgar hadn't just been watching these families, he'd been systematically driving them out of town, then stealing their property through fraudulent means. The photos weren't just evidence of his voyeurism, they were leverage. Compromising images that could destroy reputations in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the flashlight. The service was spotty in the basement, but the message had somehow gotten through. "Stop digging, or your baby pays the price." The words blurred as tears of fear filled her eyes. Someone was watching her right now, someone who knew exactly what she'd discovered and was willing to threaten her unborn child to keep her quiet. She stuffed several of the most damaging documents into her jacket and hurried back through the hidden passage, her heart hammering against her ribs. The basement stairs had never seemed so steep, and by the time she reached the main floor, she was gasping for breath. The house felt wrong now, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on her. Every shadow could hide a watcher. Every creak of settling wood could be someone moving through rooms she thought were empty. She grabbed her keys with shaking fingers and headed for the door, desperate to get somewhere safe where she could think clearly. But safety was an illusion. As she stepped onto the front porch, she saw Detective Morrison's car pulling into her driveway. His expression was grim as he approached, and she noticed he kept his hand near his service weapon. "Mrs. Chen, we need to talk." His voice carried none of its usual warmth. "I've received some disturbing reports about your activities here." "Detective, thank God you're here. I found something terrible in the basement. Edgar Whitmore was—" "I know what Edgar Whitmore was," Morrison cut her off. "The question is what you plan to do with that information." The words hit her like ice water. Morrison wasn't here to help her, he was here to silence her. The realization must have shown on her face because his expression hardened. "You have to understand, Mrs. Chen. This town has worked very hard to put certain unpleasant truths behind us. Edgar Whitmore died 30 years ago. His secrets died with him. Or they should have." Sarah's mind raced. How many people knew? How deep did the conspiracy go? The families who'd been driven out, their properties seized. Had anyone tried to seek justice? And if so, what had happened to them? "My husband knows I'm here," she lied, backing toward her car. "If something happens to me—" "Nothing needs to happen to you," Morrison said, his tone almost gentle. "You just need to seal up that basement wall and forget what you found. Think about your baby. Think about the life you want to build here." The baby kicked as if responding to the mention, reminding Sarah of exactly what she had to lose. But the documents in her jacket felt like fire against her skin. All those families driven from their homes, their lives destroyed by Edgar's twisted game of control and manipulation. She had a choice to make, and either option could cost everything. The basement felt different now, charged with the weight of discovery and the electricity of fear. Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone wall, listening to the footsteps above grow fainter as Marcus moved toward the front of the house. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had been unusually active since she descended into this hidden chamber. The beam from her flashlight swept across the walls one more time, illuminating the metal boxes she'd pried open just minutes before. Gold coins, bearer bonds, and stacks of cash that represented more money than she'd ever imagined. But now, crouched in the shadows with Marcus prowling overhead, the fortune felt more like a curse than a blessing. She needed to get out, but the only exit she knew led directly into the main house where Marcus waited. Sarah forced herself to think logically despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. There had to be another way. Houses built during Prohibition often had multiple escape routes, especially ones used by people who clearly operated outside the law. Moving as quietly as her pregnant frame would allow, Sarah examined the far wall more carefully. Her fingers traced the mortar between stones, searching for irregularities. About 6 feet from the corner, she found what she was looking for, a section where the mortar had been deliberately weakened and replaced multiple times. Working frantically but quietly, Sarah used her car keys to scrape away the loose cement. The work was exhausting, and she had to pause frequently to catch her breath and listen for sounds from above. Each time she stopped, the silence seemed more ominous than before. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she'd cleared enough mortar to push against one of the stones. It shifted inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. The musty smell that wafted out suggested it hadn't been used in decades, but it represented hope. Sarah gathered as much of the smaller valuables as she could carry, stuffing bearer bonds and a handful of gold coins into her jacket pockets. The rest would have to wait. Right now, survival mattered more than wealth. The tunnel was barely wide enough for her to crawl through, and navigating it while pregnant proved challenging. The baby seemed to sense her distress, pressing against her ribs in a way that made breathing difficult. Sarah whispered soft reassurances as much to herself as to her unborn child, promising that they would get through this together. The passage stretched longer than expected, sloping gradually upward. Sarah's knees ached against the rough stone, and her hands were scraped raw, but she pressed forward. Behind her she could hear faint sounds that might have been Marcus discovering the hidden room, though the distance made it impossible to be certain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of crawling, Sarah saw a faint outline of light ahead. The tunnel ended at another loose stone, this one leading to what appeared to be an old storm cellar, about 200 yards from the main house. She pushed through the opening and found herself in a space filled with rotting wooden shelves and the remains of preserved goods from decades past. The storm cellar's entrance was secured with a rusty padlock, but the wood around the hinges had deteriorated enough that Sarah could force it open with sustained pressure. She emerged into the late afternoon sunlight like a creature surfacing from another world, gasping and disoriented. Her car was parked near the house, but approaching it meant risking an encounter with Marcus. Instead, Sarah made her way toward the road, staying low and using the overgrown bushes as cover. She needed help, but more importantly, she needed to understand exactly what she'd stumbled into and why Marcus was so desperate to keep her from it. The walk to town took nearly an hour, complicated by her need to rest frequently and stay off the main road. When she finally reached the sheriff's office, Sarah looked like she'd been through a war, covered in dirt, scratched and exhausted. Deputy Williams took one look at her and immediately called for medical assistance. "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, though she accepted the chair gratefully. "But I need to speak with Sheriff Morrison immediately. It's about the Whitmore property, and something much bigger than anyone realized." As she waited for the sheriff to arrive, Sarah's mind raced through everything she'd discovered. The hidden fortune was only part of the puzzle. Marcus's appearance, his obvious familiarity with the house, and his desperate attempt to stop her suggested connections that reached far beyond simple greed. The baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing that their ordeal was far from over. Sarah placed both hands protectively over her belly, knowing that whatever came next, she was no longer just fighting for a house or even a fortune. She was fighting for both their lives against forces she was only beginning to understand. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have in Sarah's trembling hands. 3 days had passed since Marcus Webb's cryptic warning, and she'd barely slept. Every creak of the old house made her jump. Every shadow seemed to harbor watching eyes. But this envelope, slipped under her door sometime during the night, contained answers she'd been desperately seeking. Inside were photocopied police reports dating back 15 years, each one detailing suspicious incidents at her property. Break-ins where nothing was stolen, vandalism that seemed more like searching than destruction, 2 missing persons reports for people last seen near the house, and at the bottom, a handwritten note, "They're not done looking. Get out while you can. A friend." Sarah's hands moved protectively to her swollen belly as she read through the reports again. The baby kicked restlessly as if sensing her distress. She needed to leave Millbrook Falls, that much was becoming clear, but not without the answers that had cost her so much to uncover. The sound of gravel crunching in her driveway made her freeze. Through the living room window, she watched Detective Hayes emerge from his patrol car, his expression grim. Behind him, a black sedan she didn't recognize pulled up, and two men in expensive suits climbed out. Sarah quickly stuffed the police reports back into their envelope and shoved it beneath the couch cushions. By the time Hayes knocked, she'd managed to compose herself enough to answer the door. "Mrs. Chen," Hayes said, removing his hat. "I'm afraid we need to ask you some questions. These gentlemen are from the FBI." The taller agent, a severe man with steel-grey hair, stepped forward. "Agent Morrison, Mrs. Chen, we understand you've been doing some excavation work on your property." "Just some renovations," Sarah replied carefully, not inviting them in. "Nothing major." "We have reports of significant digging," Morrison continued. "Old concrete being broken up, the kind of disturbance that might uncover things." The weight of their stares felt crushing. Sarah fought to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what you're implying, Agent Morrison, but I'm just trying to fix up my home before my baby arrives." Hayes stepped closer, his voice softer but no less urgent. "Sarah, listen to me. There are dangerous people interested in your property, people who've been searching for something for a very long time. If you found anything at all, you need to tell us now." Through the window, Sarah caught sight of movement in the tree line behind her house, a flash of dark clothing, there and gone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I haven't found anything," she lied, thinking of the small fortune in bearer bonds hidden beneath her bedroom floorboards, just old pipes and rotted wood. Agent Morrison exchanged a look with his partner. "Mrs. Chen, we have reason to believe that Vincent Torino, a known associate of the Romano crime family, buried approximately $2 million in stolen casino money somewhere on this property before his arrest in 2009. Money that a lot of dangerous people would kill for." The baby kicked hard, making Sarah gasp and grab her side. The stress was becoming too much. "I don't know anything about stolen money or crime families. I just want to raise my child in peace." "That's exactly what we want too," Hayes said gently. "But peace isn't possible while that money remains missing. Torino died in prison 3 years ago, taking the secret of its location with him. But someone clearly believes you're getting close to finding it." Another movement caught Sarah's eye, this time closer to the house. Someone was definitely watching them. The realization that she was completely exposed, standing in her doorway with federal agents, sent ice through her veins. "I need to sit down," she said, stepping back. "The baby—" "Of course." Morrison's demeanor softened slightly. "But Mrs. Chen, time isn't on our side here. Our sources indicate that Tony Romano himself is taking a personal interest in your property. He's not known for his patience or his mercy." As if summoned by the agent's words, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but the message was crystal clear. "Stop talking to cops. You have 24 hours to find what belongs to us. Your baby's life depends on it." "That's it," he said firmly. "You're coming with us now." But Sarah was already backing into her house, her mind racing. The police reports under her couch cushions, the hidden money, the watching eyes in the woods. It all crystallized into a terrible understanding. She couldn't trust the FBI, couldn't trust the local police, couldn't trust anyone in this web of corruption that had somehow ensnared her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, slamming the door and turning the deadbolt. Through the wood she could hear their urgent voices, but her focus was already shifting to the back of the house, to escape routes and desperate plans. 24 hours to save her unborn child's life. The hunt was about to begin. The basement felt different now, as if the very air had thickened with malevolent intent. Sarah clutched the metal lockbox against her swollen belly, her other hand gripping the makeshift weapon, a rusty pipe she'd grabbed from the corner. Above her, footsteps creaked across the old floorboards, deliberate and methodical. She'd found what Marcus had died for, The lockbox contained bearer bonds worth nearly $2 million, along with a leather journal detailing decades of corruption involving half the town council. Names, dates, amounts, all meticulously recorded in cramped handwriting. But now she understood why people had killed for this secret, and why they'd kill again. The basement door groaned open. Sarah pressed herself against the far wall, behind the furnace, trying to control her ragged breathing. The baby kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger. "Sarah?" Detective Morrison's voice drifted down the wooden stairs. "I know you're down there. We need to talk." Her blood ran cold. Morrison had been investigating Marcus's murder, had seemed genuinely concerned for her safety. But the tone in his voice now carried no warmth, only grim determination. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this," Morrison continued, his footsteps descending slowly. "You should have left well enough alone." Sarah's mind raced. Morrison's name had appeared multiple times in the journal: payments, cover-ups, evidence tampering. He'd been protecting the conspiracy for years, probably since before Marcus ever bought this house. "The thing about small towns," Morrison said conversationally, his voice growing closer, "is that everyone's connected. Marcus thought he was so clever, gathering his little insurance policy, but he never realized how deep this went." Sarah edged around the furnace, clutching the lockbox tighter. The basement had one window, small, high up, probably too small for her to fit through, even if she weren't 8 months pregnant. The stairs were the only real way out, and Morrison blocked that path. "I've been cleaning up this mess for 20 years, Morrison continued. "Every time someone got too curious, every time someone asked the wrong questions. You think Marcus was the first?" A floorboard creaked directly above her hiding spot. Sarah held her breath, her heart hammering so loud she was certain he could hear it. The baby's movements had stilled, as if even the unborn child recognized the need for silence. "I checked the town record, Sarah. Very thorough purchase. But you missed something important." Morrison's flashlight beam swept across the basement, probing the shadows. "The property includes mineral rights, and those mineral rights were used as collateral for some very creative financing over the years." Sarah pressed her back against the cold stone wall. Through a gap in the furnace housing, she could see Morrison's legs as he moved through the basement, searching methodically. "The beautiful thing about bearer bonds," he continued, "is that they're completely untraceable. Perfect for moving money without banks asking awkward questions. Marcus figured that out eventually, started making demands." The lockbox felt heavier in Sarah's arms. Inside was enough evidence to destroy Morrison and his Skio conspirators, but only if she survived to use it. Morrison's radio crackled. "Unit 7 to base. False alarm on Elm Street. Probably just kids." He'd called off any potential backup, Sarah realized with growing terror. Whatever happened here, no one was coming to help. "I know this is scary," Morrison said, his voice taking on an almost paternal tone, "but this doesn't have to end badly. The bonds, the journal, they belong to people who've worked very hard to build this town into something better. Marcus was greedy. Don't make his mistake." Sarah's hand found her phone in her pocket. No signal in the basement, but maybe if she could reach higher ground. She looked up at the small window again, calculating distances and angles. "Your baby deserves to grow up in a stable community," Morrison continued. "These bonds fund after-school programs, road improvements, senior services. You'd really destroy all that for what? Money that was never yours to begin with?" The manipulation in his voice made Sarah's skin crawl. She thought about her unborn daughter, about the future they could have together if she could just survive the next few minutes. Morrison's footsteps stopped. "I can wait all night, Sarah. You're 8 months pregnant. Exactly how long do you think you can hide down here?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the baby's gentle movements resume. She thought about David, probably frantic with worry by now, about the life growing inside her that deserved a chance to exist, about Marcus, who died trying to expose the truth. She gripped the pipe tighter and made her decision. The truth was worth fighting for, even if the odds were impossible, even if she was just one pregnant woman against a conspiracy that had controlled this town for decades. Taking a deep breath, Sarah Chen stepped out from behind the furnace and faced her would-be killer. The emergency room lights blazed overhead as Sarah gripped Marcus's hand, her breathing ragged from more than just the chase through the woods. Dr. Patel's concerned face appeared above her as another contraction rippled through her abdomen. "The baby's in distress," he said quietly to Marcus. "We need to prep for delivery now." Sarah's mind reeled between the physical pain and the knowledge that Vincent Holbrook was still out there. "Marcus," she gasped, "the documents, did you get them to Detective Morrison?" "They're safe," he assured her, though his eyes betrayed his worry about more immediate concerns. "Focus on our daughter, right now." As they wheeled her toward the delivery room, Sarah caught sight of Detective Morrison striding through the hospital corridors, his phone pressed to his ear. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a reassuring nod before disappearing around a corner. The next hours blurred together in a haze of medical urgency and overwhelming relief. When their daughter finally arrived, healthy despite the trauma, Sarah felt a profound shift in her priorities. The treasure that had consumed her thoughts for months suddenly seemed secondary to the tiny life cradled in her arms. But Vincent Holbrook had made this personal, and Sarah knew their ordeal wasn't over. 3 days later, as Sarah recovered in the hospital with baby Elena, Detective Morrison visited with updates that made her blood run cold. "Holbrook's disappeared," he said grimly. "We raided his office, but he'd already cleared out. However, those documents you found have blown this case wide open. The FBI's involved now. Turns out Holbrook's been laundering money through property acquisitions across 3 states. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the visitor's chair. "What does that mean for us? For our safety?" Morrison's expression was grave. "We have patrol cars watching the hospital, and will maintain protection when you go home. But Holbrook's desperate now. He knows those documents prove his connection to the original heist and his subsequent crimes. He can't afford to leave loose ends." Sarah adjusted Elena in her arms, marveling at how something so precious had emerged from such chaos. "The gold, have you recovered it?" "Most of it. Our team found the main cache exactly where your research indicated. Preliminary estimates put the value at over 12 million in today's market." Morrison paused. "Given the circumstances and your role in uncovering this decades-old case, there'll likely be a substantial reward." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She'd bought the house hoping to find treasure, and she had, but nearly at the cost of everything that truly mattered. That evening, as Marcus dozed in the uncomfortable hospital chair and Elena slept peacefully in her bassinet, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You cost me everything. Time to return the favor." Her heart hammered as she immediately called the nurses' station, then Detective Morrison. Within minutes, security had flooded their floor, but the message had achieved its purpose. Vincent Holbrook wanted her to know he was still hunting her. "We're moving you to a safe house," Morrison announced after reviewing the threat. "Tonight." The transfer happened under cover of darkness, with Sarah, Marcus, and Elena whisked away in an unmarked van while decoy vehicles drew attention elsewhere. The safe house sat on the outskirts of town, a modest ranch home that felt both protective and isolating. For 2 days, they lived in limbo. Elena thrived despite the upheaval, but Sarah found herself constantly checking windows, jumping at every unfamiliar sound. The state police had taken over the investigation, coordinating with federal agents who treated the case with the seriousness of a major organized crime bust. On the 3rd night, Sarah was nursing Elena when she noticed the security detail outside had changed positions. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate what. Marcus was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard him call out in alarm. "Sarah, get Elena and get to the back bedroom now." Through the living room window, she glimpsed a figure moving stealthily across the yard, tall, lean, wearing dark clothing. Vincent Holbrook had found them. Sarah scooped up Elena and ran toward the bedroom as instructed, her heart pounding with terror and rage. How dare this man threaten her newborn daughter over his criminal enterprise? How dare he turn their joy into fear? From the kitchen came the sound of splintering wood and Marcus shouting. Sarah locked the bedroom door and pressed speed dial for Detective Morrison with trembling fingers, even as she heard footsteps in the hallway. "He's here," she whispered when Morrison answered. "Holbrook's in the house." The bedroom door shook under a violent impact. Then another. Sarah clutched Elena tighter, backing toward the window as the door frame began to splinter. In the distance, sirens wailed, but they sounded impossibly far away. The door gave way with a crash, and Vincent Holbrook stepped into the room, his face twisted with desperate fury. "Time to finish this," he growled, advancing toward mother and child. The abandoned warehouse stretched before Sarah like a concrete cathedral, shadows pooling in its corners despite the harsh glare of police floodlights. Her hands trembled as she clutched Detective Martinez's arm, her 8-month belly making every step feel precarious. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the danger that had finally caught up with them. "You shouldn't be here," Martinez whispered, but Sarah shook her head firmly. "This ends tonight. I'm not running anymore." The fortune she'd discovered, millions in bearer bonds hidden within the warehouse walls, had seemed like a blessing just days ago. Now it felt like a curse that had painted a target on her back and her unborn child's future. Vincent Torino's men had been circling closer each day, and when they'd taken her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, as leverage, Sarah knew the game had changed completely. A metallic clang echoed through the cavernous space, followed by a voice that made Sarah's blood freeze. "Mrs. Chen, so good of you to accept my invitation." Vincent Torino stepped out from behind a support pillar, his expensive suit incongruous against the warehouse's decay. Mrs. Henderson stood beside him, duct tape across her mouth and fear bright in her elderly eyes. 2 armed men flanked them, their weapons trained on Sarah despite her obvious pregnancy. "Let her go," Sarah called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "This is between us." Torino's laugh bounced off the concrete walls. "Oh, but it's so much more than that now, isn't it? You've been quite resourceful. I'll give you credit." "Finding what my dear departed business partner Anthony Blackwood hid from me all those years ago." Sarah's mind raced. Anthony Blackwood, the warehouse's previous owner who died in the suspicious fire. The same fire that had supposedly destroyed any evidence of Torino's money laundering operation. Except Blackwood had been smarter than anyone realized. "He never trusted you," Sarah said, taking a small step forward. Behind her, she could sense Martinez and his backup team moving into position. "That's why he hid the bonds. He knew what kind of man you really were." "A practical man," Torino replied, his smile never wavering. "Which brings us to our current situation. You're going to tell me exactly where you've hidden my property, and then you're going to walk away and forget any of this ever happened. And if I refuse?" Torino's expression hardened as he nodded to one of his men, who pressed his gun against Mrs. Henderson's temple. The elderly woman whimpered behind her gag. "Then your neighbor pays the price for your stubbornness, followed shortly by you and that baby you're carrying." The casual way he threatened her unborn child sent a surge of protective fury through Sarah. She'd spent months feeling powerless, first as a struggling single mother-to-be, then as a reluctant discoverer of stolen millions. But standing here now, she realized she held more cards than she'd understood. "The bonds aren't hidden anymore," she said clearly. "I turned them over to the FBI yesterday, along with Anthony Blackwood's detailed records of your entire operation." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of the city beyond its walls. Torino's mask of civility finally slipped, revealing the predator underneath. "You're lying." "Agent Rebecca Foster, Financial Crimes Division," Sarah continued, her confidence growing. She was very interested in Blackwood's meticulous bookkeeping. 20 years of transactions, shell companies, offshore accounts. He documented everything, Vincent, including the murder of that accountant in 1998 who tried to go straight. Torino's gun appeared in his hand with practiced speed, but Sarah was ready for that too. Kill me and it proves everything in those files. Let us go, and maybe you have time to run before they close the net. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Mrs. Henderson's terrified breathing was audible in the silence. Sarah felt her baby shift restlessly, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. That's when the warehouse lights blazed to life, and Agent Foster's amplified voice filled the space. "Vincent Torino, you're surrounded. Release the hostages and surrender immediately." Chaos erupted. Torino's men spun toward the new threat, giving Martinez's team the opening they needed. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse as Sarah threw herself behind a concrete barrier, shielding her unborn child as best she could. Through the mayhem, she saw Mrs. Henderson break free and stumble toward safety. One of Torino's gunmen went down, clutching his shoulder. The other surrendered immediately, weapons clattering to the floor. But Torino himself had vanished into the warehouse's maze of shadows and forgotten corners. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as silence fell again. Somewhere in the darkness she knew he was still hunting. The fortune that was supposed to secure her child's future had instead drawn a killer to their doorstep. And this wasn't over yet. The sirens faded into the distance as Sarah watched Detective Morrison escort Vincent Blackwood toward the police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind his back. The man who had terrorized her for weeks looked smaller now, defeated, his empire of greed crumbling around him. "It's over," Marcus whispered, his arm tightening around her shoulders as another contraction rippled through her body. "Sarah, we need to get you to the hospital." She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the house that had started it all. The morning sun cast long shadows across its weathered facade, and for the first time since she'd bought it, the place looked peaceful. The secret it had guarded for decades was finally free. Dr. Patel appeared at her side, medical bag in hand. "How far apart are the contractions?" "About 4 minutes," Sarah gasped, leaning heavily against Marcus as another wave hit. "But I needed to see this through." "Well, your baby clearly has other plans," the doctor said with a gentle smile. "Let's get you somewhere more appropriate for bringing new life into the world." As they helped her toward Marcus's car, Sarah caught sight of Eleanor Hartwell standing at the edge of the crowd that had gathered. The elderly woman's face was streaked with tears, but her expression held something Sarah had never seen before: relief. "Wait!" Sarah called out, extending her hand toward Eleanor. "Mrs. Hartwell!" Eleanor approached hesitantly, her cane tapping against the pavement. "I owe you an apology, dear. All these years, I've been so afraid of what people might find, of what they might think of Thomas. But you've given him back his honor." Sarah squeezed the older woman's frail hand. He was trying to do the right thing. "That takes courage. He would have liked you," Eleanor said softly. "You both see treasures where others see only problems." Another contraction doubled Sarah over, and Marcus gently but firmly guided her toward the car. "We really need to go now." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and breathing exercises. Sarah's mind wandered between the pain and the extraordinary events of the morning. Thomas Hartwell's journal, discovered in the final hidden compartment, had revealed everything. His discovery of Vincent's embezzlement, the threats against his family, and his desperate decision to fake his own death and disappear rather than expose the truth and endanger those he loved. The real treasure hadn't been the gold coins or the bearer bonds worth millions that they'd found. It had been justice, finally served after 60 years. "Almost there," Marcus said, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Just breathe, okay?" Sarah managed a laugh between contractions. "I think our daughter has a flair for dramatic timing." "She gets that from her mother," Marcus replied, pulling into the hospital's emergency bay. The next few hours blurred together in a symphony of medical equipment, encouraging voices, and waves of pain that seemed impossible to endure. But each time Sarah felt like giving up, she thought about Thomas Hartwell's courage, about Eleanor's decades of silent suffering, about the new life fighting to enter the world. One more push, Dr. Reeves urged. I can see her head. Sarah bore down with every ounce of strength she had left, Marcus's hand anchoring her to the moment. Then suddenly, miraculously, the room filled with the sound of a baby's cry, strong, indignant, absolutely perfect. She's beautiful, Dr. Reeves announced, placing the tiny, squirming bundle on Sarah's chest. Congratulations! Sarah looked down at her daughter's wrinkled red face, her impossibly small fingers already grasping at the air, and felt her heart expand in ways she never knew possible. All the fear, all the danger, all the uncertainty of the past months melted away in the face of this perfect, tiny human being. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm your mama." Marcus leaned over them both, his own eyes bright with tears. "She's incredible, absolutely incredible. Have you chosen a name?" the nurse asked gently. Sarah looked up at Marcus, then back down at their daughter. They'd discussed names for months, but now only one felt right. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Later, as Sarah dozed with Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, Marcus sat beside the hospital bed, updating Detective Morrison by phone. The investigation would continue, Vincent's co-conspirators would be found, and Thomas Hartwell's name would finally be cleared in the public record. But Sarah barely heard the details. Her attention was focused entirely on the miracle in her arms, on the steady rhythm of Hope's breathing, on the promise of all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them. The notorious eyesore on Maple Street would be renovated now, transformed into something beautiful. Like everything else in Sarah's life, it had simply been waiting for someone to see its true potential. Hope stirred in her sleep, and Sarah smiled. Some treasures, she realized, were worth any risk.